Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor C.V. Ragavulu. The topic, the module for today is Approaches to Public Administration. It has three subtopics: scientific management, classical approach, and bureaucratic approach. First of all, we will take up the traditional or classical approach. This places emphasis upon the structure of the organization, design, and principles of organization. The main concern of this approach is to increase the efficiency of the organization or make changes within the organization or structure with a view to improve efficiency. Now, Frederick Tyler is credited with pioneering work in scientific management. He has worked in many industrial concerns before he plunged into his research on scientific management. Tyler was working on his project at a time when United States and the entire Western world was going through some sort of a post-industrial crisis. I am referring to the period after the Industrial Revolution, when there was accumulation of resources, capital, and a lot of expansion of the industry. But it is these kinds of expansion which have brought in a number of problems, partly because there were no commensurate organizational improvements. There were no corresponding improvements in the management of the organizations concerned. So there was some sort of chaos, dissatisfaction among the managers as well as the workers. So the time was ripe for somebody with an intellectual mind like Tyler to enter the field and start doing work. Frederick Tyler's scientific management had a definite philosophy with certain assumptions of its own. One of them is that there has to be maximum production, as much production as possible. One. Number two, there has to be prosperity for both management as well as the workers. And in fact, they go together. A third tenet is that there has to be cooperation between the management and the workers. And without such cooperation, it's not possible to increase production. But all of these require some sort of orientation, a mental revolution on the part of both management and the workers. And this is what Frederick Tyler has enunciated, what are known as the principles of scientific management. Now, the crux and essence of these principles are that there has to be a true science of management to be developed. And further, there has to be scientific selection and training of workers. Further, there has to be division of work between management and the workers. This is not something new. Well, in some ways it is new because hitherto much of the burden of work fell upon the shoulders of the workers. So now, according to Tyler, the management has to share this burden a great deal, and then only there would be better management in the process. But this requires lot of cooperation on the part of the management as well as the workers. In a sense, Tyler was edging out the eccentricities of the trade union movement. We should again look at the theoretical background in which Tyler had entered the scene. Mainly because of the influence of Marxism in Western Europe, trade unionism was taking its seeds, and it also spread to the United States. So many American managers and owners were concerned about the influx of aggressive trade unionism. So it is in this background Frederick Tyler's suggestion to promote cooperation between the workers and management holds a great deal of promise. Then Tyler was also insisting upon a division of the fruits of the industry. It's not that management alone would appropriate, but then the profits have to be shared with the workers also. Well, how could this be done? Well, he has devised a number of methods, and one of them is piece rate system, that workers would get rewards according to their contribution to productivity or the turnover of work of each worker. So rewards are not something static as you find in a pay scale or a daily wage. As a worker goes on contributing more to the industry, the rewards would be on a much higher and higher scale. This is how Tyler was trying to pass on the profits, at least a share of the profits to the industry. And this is what he called the prosperity of both management as well as the workers. And that was the Magna Carta of Frederick Tyler's scientific management. But in all this, we should look at the essence of Tyler's approach. His approach was scientific in the sense that he has conducted a number of experiments. They are called time and motion studies. How to improve the turnover of work by changing the tools, by bringing about improvements in the engineering aspects, and then also in terms of scheduling of work, then with emphasis on teamwork. Coordination is a very important element of Tyler's work, that you can reduce duplication of work, overlapping of work through coordination and teamwork. So Tyler was also placing emphasis upon this. Then the other elements, harmony and cooperation, they are very important. And the emphasis upon harmony brings about a new culture in the industrial situation. He was trying to motivate the workers by making them part of the team, part of the industrial enterprise itself. So here the emphasis of Tyler again is on the development, or rather the fullest development of each man, each worker within the industry. So this objective is really laudable in terms of the approach and philosophy of Frederick Tyler. So in other words, Tyler was focusing upon the best way of building organizations. How to change the structures so that we can get the best out of every human being. Focus of this is upon efficiency, improvement of productivity, getting productivity at a lower cost, at lesser time, and with greater speed, and with minimum exertion of the human beings. And that was the goal and also the philosophy of Frederick Tyler. How to evaluate Tyler's contribution to public administration? Well, it all started in the field of private management. But like many other principles of management, even Taylorism leaves a legacy for public administration. In fact, Taylor's was a pioneering effort in terms of relating human beings to the structure or the organization. This is something which is of enduring importance to the study of public administration itself. Now, his contribution has left a lot of influence on subsequent scholars. Researchers, teachers, students of public administration. So the emphasis upon increasing productivity is something which is important even today. Everybody talks about increasing productivity. How to make things better, how to make things at lesser cost, how to improve the output. These are all concerns with which Frederick Tyler was preoccupied, and they continue to haunt us even today, or they continue to be relevant, in fact even more relevant today. So in that sense, Frederick Tyler has made a significant contribution to the study of public administration. Now, one final observation. He talks about the partnership between management and workers, management and labor. And this is also a schema which continues to be relevant. I mean, no organization can be run without teamwork, without cooperation, without harmony among various human elements within the organization. So that way, Tyler is relevant today. However, we must also realize that any theory would have its critics, and scientific management is no exception to this. There are many criticisms, and one of them is that what Tyler has presented is a machine model. He looks at human beings within scientific management as cogs in a machine. He doesn't give adequate importance to the human factor in the organization. Then secondly, he was also criticized for considering that money was the only motivator for improving productivity, or money was the chief motivator for human beings. So in that sense, people have not taken Tyler kindly. There were also other critics who argue, look here, Tyler was somewhat devilish. Scientific management has destroyed, more or less, the trade union movement by softening the edges of conflict between the labor and management. So in all these respects, Tyler is being attacked. But however, as we see in the continued reference to Taylor in subsequent writings and the continued importance of the structure of the organization, they show that Taylor's work continued to live in the discipline and in the writings of subsequent writers. The second subhead of our unit is the classical approach. The classical approach was developed in the first quarter of the 20th century. Here, the important name that figures is that of Henry Fayol, who made a signal contribution for the development of the classical approach. Other scholars include James Mooney and Alan Reilly. But it was only after the publication of the work by Gulick and Urwick, the work known as Papers on the Science of Administration, published in 1938, that the classical theory became quite significant. There are many important characteristics and assumptions of classical theory, and many of these characteristics are common to scientific management also. Not only the characteristics but also the approaches to organization change are quite common. The emphasis upon the structure of the organization is one such. It assumes that every organization has a formal structure with rules, principles, and work procedures. And any effort at improvement of the organization has to focus upon all of them. They also place emphasis upon the design of the organization. Another aspect of classical theory is the development of a number of principles of organization. And this is one of the important areas of contribution of the classical school. What are these principles? Division of work, hierarchy, span of control, coordination, delegation, unity of command, centralization, decentralization, and so on and so forth. Now, in order to improve the organizational structure, one has to make interventions in a number of ways, particularly with regard to the application of the principles which have been just now mentioned. Another aspect which again is common to both classical theory and scientific management, of course scientific management is a part of classical theory, is that man can be motivated through economic incentives only. It is also called the concept of the economic man. One other element that is common to both Taylorism and these writers is the emphasis upon specialization for improvement of work. That you have to develop specializations within the organization, and you have to train individuals as a specialist for improvement of the organization. They also assume that there is no difference between public and private management or public and private administration with regard to the application of all these principles of management. Many of you might have heard what is known as postcard, POSTCORB. Post-corp refers to the various elements of the organization. In this, P stands for planning, O for organization, S for supervision, D for direction, CO for coordination, R for reporting, and B for budgeting. So these various elements of organization have been coined by Golick and Arvik, and they have occupied considerable academic space in the subsequent decades in organization and management work in public administration. Now, Golick and Arvik are considered important in terms of their focus upon unity of command. Now, what does unity of command mean? That an individual employee would be answerable, accountable to only one superior. Okay, not more than one. Unfortunately, this concept of unity of command or subservience to a single center or subservience to one top executive is in some conflict with Taylor's notion of functional supervision. Now, functional supervision requires supervision by more than one individual. Well, there are a few other differences between the classical theory enunciated by Henry Fayol, Mooney and Reilly, and also Arvik and Golick and Taylor. Now we have to move on to the criticisms which have been leveled against the classical theory. One of them is that classical theory lacks universal validity. It is based on experiments in some narrow corners in a very limited number of organizations, or at least its empirical base itself is weak. Once its empirical base is weak, it cannot have universal application. Now, a second criticism is that it lacks sophistication, consistency, and precision. It's not sophisticated enough because a number of principles have been jumbled up. It provides a good prose, a narrative, but not an integrated way of looking at the entire organization. That's one. And it is also inconsistent. I mean, some of the principles are inconsistent, as I'm going to discuss shortly. It also lacks precision. Precision in the sense that, there's a lot of verbosity. There's been a lot of writing, duplication of material. The same things are being repeated time and again, maybe in chapter after chapter. That's one problem. And then it is also considered atomistic. Atomistic, A-T-O-M-I-S-T-I-C. Atomistic means that it looks at individuals in isolation from the environment. That individuals or human beings are continuously interacting with others and with the environment. By taking a mechanistic view of individuals, we are not able to come up with generalizations which would have lot of validity. Then the predilection and preference of the classical theories for structure, rules, and procedures is too much. I mean, it places too much of emphasis upon these. Then finally, it also exhibits a pro-management bias, to the neglect of consideration of the worth and individuality of the workers. And friends, finally, I must also get back to one of the major criticisms made by Herbert Simon. Herbert Simon said that the various principles of the classical school are like proverbs and myths. What does he mean when he says this? Now, each proverb may also have another proverb, that they may not be consistent with each other. And the principles that have been enunciated by the classical theories display the same kind of looseness. And there are principles which are inconsistent with other principles. Let me give you an example. For instance, you have the principle of span of control. Span of control is, in span of control, the lower the number of individuals who report to one superior, the better it is. However, you have another principle which is called hierarchy. And there it is said, the lower the number of levels or gradations in a hierarchy, the better off we are. Now, if you have a lower number of people reporting to each superior, you will have a number of gradations within a hierarchy, number of levels within a hierarchy. So there is a subtle contradiction between the two, that if you have a lower span, you can't have a tight hierarchy. That's it. So Simon goes on arguing, look here, there is a contradiction or inconsistency between one principle and the other principle. The classical approach is only one of the approaches to the study of public administration. In fact, many of these writers have explored matters relating to the organization and management before anybody else did. So in that sense, they have provided the foundations, the building blocks for subsequent work on organization. Of course, the work on organizations became more refined, more sophisticated in subsequent years. But we cannot, looking back at the classical theory, we should not forget their contribution to public administration as such. The third component of this unit is the bureaucratic approach of Max Weber. Max Weber lived during 1864 to 1920. He is a German sociologist with considerable influence upon the subsequent work within the social sciences. In fact, his contribution to bureaucracy is only one of the several elements of his contribution to the social sciences. And we are only considering that element only here. According to Weber, bureaucracy is an administrative body of appointed officials. I'm emphasizing this because there are many meanings attributed to the word or the concept bureaucracy. There are some people who have used it in a pejorative sense, whereas Weber uses this term to an organization consisting of appointed officials with some sort of permanent tenure. Now, a concept which Weber uses or introduces while talking about bureaucracy is authority. Authority refers to the command with a definite content that elicits obedience from others. Now, authority is being characterized in three ways, or there are three types of authority. One is traditional, second charismatic, third legal rational. When we talk about bureaucracy, we are concerned with the last one, legal rational authority. Now, legal rational authority, bureaucracy is considered to be based on legal rational form of authority. Now, according to Weber, there are some chief features of the bureaucracy. What are these? To start with, we have division of work or specialization. In every organization or office, you have specialization based on division of work. And there is also continuity of business within each organization. Third element is hierarchy. Fourth, existence of rules and procedures. Fifth, a career system. And sixth, a body of trained and qualified officials within the bureaucracy. These are the main features of bureaucracy. Now, Weberian bureaucracy also has certain important characteristic features. These are neutrality or impartiality, stress upon written documents. Third, emphasis upon formalism of the organization. Weber makes a distinction between the office and the office holder. I mean, the employee and the job which he is holding. Now, similarly, he makes a distinction between things that are private and things that belong to the public domain. So, these are important distinctions when we talk about bureaucracy. In earlier characterizations of bureaucracy, there were no such subtle distinctions being made between things that are personal and official, things that are public and things that are private. So the credit goes to Max Weber for introducing these types of subtle distinctions. Weber is very much concerned with the notion of efficiency, and that's why he is clubbed with other writers of the classical school. Weber is having a common ground with the earlier writers in terms of his emphasis upon formalism, upon structure, and upon written documents and procedures, and also upon the notion of efficiency. But Weberian characterization of efficiency is somewhat different from the earlier ones. Now, efficiency in an organization arises because of the concern of the officials or the entire bureaucracy with knowledge, with rational behavior. What is rationality? Rationality is that behavior which tries to make the choice of the best means for attaining the ends. Now, let me repeat it again. It's the choice of the best option among all the available options to attain a certain goal. That's what we call rationality. Okay, but then how can anybody choose this? Not randomly. One can choose this only on the basis of competence, expertise, knowledge. In other words, Weberian bureaucracy is based on legal rational characteristics. Now, the cornerstone of Weberian bureaucracy is rationality, and rationality is based on expertise, competence, and knowledge. Now, if behaviors of individuals are guided by knowledge, then there is no problem of efficient outcomes. So, efficiency to Weber is the outcome of knowledge-based administration. People are competent, people have expertise, and they are guided by knowledge. And hence, decisions take the right track. So automatically you have the most efficient form of organization. In fact, Weber uses the term bureaucracy. Legal rational form of bureaucracy is the most efficient form of organization ever invented by mankind. Okay. I must admit that even one of the best theories would have some of the best critics. And Weber is no exception to this, or Weberian bureaucracy is no exception to this. Now, Weber is being attacked for his emphasis upon formalism, formal structures, rules, procedures, written documents, and the entire rigmarole of this is being criticized as too much of baggage in a modern system. Now, there are also critics who argue that legal rational model or legal rational formulation itself is somewhat inconsistent. Now, what does legal mean? To Weber, legal means something which has legitimacy, which has acceptability, which is considered right. That's what is legal. And then what is rational? Rational is that which is based on knowledge. So, what is legally acceptable may not be knowledge centric. So, acceptability is one aspect, which we call legitimacy on this side, and rationality is another. So, there is an inconsistency between what is legal and what is rational. So, Weber uses the term legal rational bureaucracy with this kind of inconsistency. Another major criticism, of course, this has been made mainly in India, are writers who are dealing with third world countries, that Weberian bureaucracy is not suitable to development administration. What they meant by this was that development administration has to be flexible. And Weberian bureaucracy is rule bound, formalistic, with an emphasis upon written commands, etc., etc. Whereas development bureaucracy has to be a little pragmatic, little open, a little accommodative, etc., etc. So they feel that it's not suitable for development administration. Friends, we must now turn to our own appreciation of Max Weber. Max Weber is not somebody who has been discarded like other theorists within the social sciences. His formulation of bureaucracy is rather unique. It's based on empirical validity. It's based on theoretical rigor. The model, the bureaucratic model of Max Weber, the way he integrates the various elements carries a rare theoretical rigor. So many of the criticisms are born out of human aberrations and political context. When people criticize bureaucracy, It's not that you have a Weberian avatar of the bureaucracy, what we have today. Now, the way human beings who fit into that, the way human beings behave in a formal organization is not based on the legal rational model of Max Weber. So we have any number of avatars, human avatars, who occupy bureaucratic roles. So there are very good people who are highly rational, who are competent, who are bound by the goal of efficiency, but there are also others, the deadwood, those who are carried away by red tape, those who are corrupt, those who are inefficient. So you have a whole spectrum of them. So now, to beat Weber by taking the example of the bad lot is very unkind, at least theoretically so. So in that sense, we have to evaluate Weber and his rational model of bureaucracy in terms of its enduring legacy. The main elements of Max Weber's bureaucracy persist even today to a great extent. And as such, it has considerable influence not only in the academic literature and public administration, but also in the world of practice. Thank you.